Hi, today we'll be speaking to Harriet Frew on eating disorders. How are you, Harriet?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So, to start us off, can you share a bit about your personal journey with overcoming bulimia and how it has shaped your work and as an eating disorder therapist?
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, many years ago now, I suffered from bulimia in my late teens and early 20s. So for me, it was partly about sort of body image at the time, but it was a lot about kind of issues that were going on in my life at the time that I felt quite out of control of, that, I was kind of wanted to sort of pave a path that was against my kind of dad's plans. I come from a sort of farming family, and eldest of four girls. My dad was desperate for me to take over the farm. I just wanted to go off to university, do different things. So I had a big kind of conflict, in forging my own path. And the eating disorder became a way of coping, really, I think, at a time where I just didn't really feel good enough, and just felt a bit lost, really. So, but yeah, I decided quite early on in my early 20s that I wanted to work in eating disorders, because I tried to seek help at the time. There's very little help available back then. I guess thankfully there's a lot more help available today, although we're still quite under-resourced. But so I decided that I wanted to train as a counsellor. So I feel quite fortunate, really. I guess my purpose came from my pain in a way, and I found out very early on what I wanted to do. I trained as a therapist, and then I've worked in eating disorders for the last 20 years, and I sort of work one-to-one with people. I train counsellors now to do my job. I podcast, do a whole variety of things, really, but I remain just very passionate about these issues today. So yeah, that's just like a very quick overview.
Amazing. So you mentioned that you suffered from bulimia in your past, and I think it's very important for teenagers to be educated on what it actually feels like to understand what someone might be dealing with. I mean, I've seen a lot of situations where someone's been like, just grow up, it's not a big deal, just start eating or stop eating, or with all these eating disorders. What does it actually feel like to be in that situation where you're struggling with bulimia?
I guess you're very sort of preoccupied with food all the time. You become very, very obsessed. Often, I think people with bulimia, and this was true for me, have a period initially where they're more very restrictive around food. They may have been underweight. And I guess, your self-worth becomes directly linked to your ability to control your food intake, the number on the scales. You become very, very obsessed, I guess, with like focusing on all those numbers. And then I think what happens with bulimia is, the level of restriction is very hard to sustain. We know from starvation studies that human beings are not good with restriction. We are designed for survival. So, if we restrict our food, we are very likely to fall into patterns of binge eating. So, and that's what happened for me. I had a period of restriction, and then quite quickly, actually, I fell into binge eating. And then I think when you've been restricting, when you binge eat, a binge is eating a very large amount of food in a small amount of time. There's a loss of control. After you've been very restrictive and you've been equating so much of your worth to what you're eating and control around food, a binge feels like really devastating. You're very terrified about weight gain, etc. And then what happens in bulimia is you fall into patterns of purging. So you might use things like self-induced vomiting, taking laxatives, over-exercising. And it's just a really horrible, punishing cycle, really. And it can feel a bit like an addiction, because between binges, people are often highly restrictive with their eating again as well. So you're constantly preoccupied with food, thinking about food. So I guess, it affects you physically, affects you socially. You can't really kind of concentrate and be in the moment day to day. For a lot of people, it affects their ability to study or parent or work. It's kind of hugely devastating. And I think there's so much shame as well. So outwardly, someone with bulimia might appear to be kind of coping and everything might seem okay, but behind closed doors, it's a very different story. Because I think there's so much shame around those binging and purging behaviours, particularly.
Yeah, and you mentioned that someone might be seen to be okay or coping. What are some warning signs or red flags that individuals and humans as a whole, as well as their friends and family, should be aware of in the build up to becoming bulimic?
I guess if someone starts to really change their eating habits, so if they start to sort of cut out food groups, go for long periods without eating, maybe they start to obsessively exercise, maybe they become very preoccupied with their weight, or they're always sort of body checking, maybe sort of spending hours and hours in the gym. I think when all of those kind of behaviors start to become obsessive, because obviously, you know, you can go to the gym and have a healthy relationship with exercise, or you might want to just be nourishing your body in a healthy way. But I think what's dangerous is when people start to become obsessive, compulsive, very preoccupied with these things. And I think, you know, once you start to restrict your intake as well, you often become highly anxious, you become lower in mood, you might withdraw from your friends. So I think some of those other signs as well might be the more obvious first signs. I think things around food are often very secretive. But if someone sort of changes with their mental well-being, so they become more withdrawn, they isolate themselves, they maybe feel they have to go to the gym rather than going out with friends, and maybe they're not able to kind of concentrate if they're studying, you know, all those kind of things can be warning signs.
Yeah, and how can someone differentiate between normal dieting behaviors and the early signs of an eating disorder?
Yeah, I think great question. And I think for many, many people, dieting full stop is not a massively healthy thing to do. But in our culture, it's very normalized, isn't it? And people are always being told just to kind of like eat less, move more, etc. So I think it's a very fine line, because actually I think there's many people out there who are following extreme dieting regimes who actually have very disordered relationship with food, but maybe they don't fit neatly into a diagnostic box of an eating disorder, but they're still very preoccupied with food. They're still restricting their calories. They're still weighing everything out. They still feel they have to go to the gym to earn their food. So I guess what's important to say as well is I think in our culture, we tend to think of eating disorders as this sort of distinct, isolated group of people, you know, that affects a very small amount of people, but we're all on the spectrum somewhere between full healthy relationship with food and full-blown eating disorder. And I think in our culture at the moment, there are many, many people that fall in that middle ground that probably have disordered eating, but they haven't quite sort of hit the diagnostic criteria.
Yeah, and I suppose the most obvious question to ask is, how can someone with bulimia overcome this issue?
Yes, big question. So, I mean, I guess ultimately it's a psychological issue. So, like Beat the Eating Disorders charity say, it's not about food, it's about feelings. So, you know, I guess it needs a like multi-layered approach. So often an eating disorder is a coping strategy for underlying distress, you know, so no one wakes up one day and thinks, right, I'm going to diet and change my body to feel better. But often an eating disorder is a way of coping with, you know, it's trying to get a bit of self-esteem, validation. It's a way of getting control. It's a way of numbing emotions. It can become a bit of an identity if you're known as the kind of really fit, healthy person on the outside, even if you're binging and purging behind closed doors. So I guess, first of all, it's starting to understand as well why you're doing it in the first place. So, you know, it might be like exploring your history, you know, seeing maybe for you, why has weight and body image become so central around your self-worth? What different factors have contributed to this? To help you understand it more from a psychological perspective, because I think most people often, they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They just kind of ended up like lost in this awful place. But actually, when you work with someone and you're trying to kind of like talk through their history and explore all the different things that have contributed to their emotional well-being, sometimes it can be very clear and make much more sense why they developed an eating disorder. So I think that psychological component is very important. So understanding first, working on motivation as well. People are often quite ambivalent about giving up an eating disorder because it's a coping strategy. And then helping people develop more healthy ways of coping. So, for example, if you're using binging and purging to deal with like anxiety or upset or distress, you know, it's learning like other ways to be able to deal with those emotions in a much more healthy way. And I guess the other bit as well is, you know, breaking that pattern of restriction as well, because with the best will in the world, any human being that restricts their eating is probably going to end up being very vulnerable to binge eating. So doing things like as well establishing a regular eating pattern, you know, having some planning and self-care around food, not in an obsessive restrictive way, but, you know, breaking out of those restrictive cycles, I guess.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it mainly caused by past trauma or issues they've faced in their past that have now made them psychologically what they've become in this eating disorder? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's quite complex, really. Like, I think, you know, things happen to all of us, I guess, don't they, when we're kind of growing up, different traumas or things might happen. And I think sometimes it can be like more obvious trauma, like someone's like really gone through something where they've been abused, or like a more obvious thing, or a significant bereavement or something. For other people it can be more like what I call more like kind of the micro traumas, where perhaps for whatever reason in their family they didn't get their emotional needs met, not because of the family are really uncaring or you don't love them, but because of maybe the parents were dealing with a lot of stress, or there was a lot of siblings and it was hard to get that individual attention. So I guess underneath an eating disorder is often perhaps problems with dealing with emotions and low self-worth. But then I guess what's interesting is many people could have that same kind of history, and not everyone might develop an eating disorder. Other people might use other forms of like addiction, or struggle with depression or anxiety, or it's quite complex, I guess, isn't it, as human beings sometimes. Yeah. The different roads we go down, really. But yeah, there's usually something, I guess, rooted in the past, which could be something that's happened. And maybe as well, I think people that perhaps have been bullied around their weight and shape, people that have just had a lot of attention around their weight and shape, positive or negative, people that have danced a lot or been in sport where weight shape has been very important, you can be more vulnerable to an eating disorder, I guess, as well, if you've had some of that exposure.
And if you have a friend or family member that's dealing with this eating disorder, how should you approach them or confront them in pursuit to try help them overcome it?
I mean, I guess just very sort of gently, really, because I think often as well, when someone has an eating disorder, at least initially, they may not realize they have an eating disorder. And if they do realize they have one, they're probably going to be quite defensive and also want to protect it, because they might feel like, actually, I kind of quite like it, or part of me quite likes it, even though obviously as well, it brings a lot of costs and a lot of struggles. So I guess a helpful thing might just be to try and talk about it. So say something like, I noticed that maybe you've changed your eating a lot, or you feel like you need to be going to the gym a lot. Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? So sort of approaching it quite gently, I guess, and not forcing anything, and asking sort of open questions, and inviting someone, I guess, to like, if you don't want to talk now, look, I'm here. I've noticed you're struggling. Please do come and talk to me when you can. And that more kind of gentle approach is more helpful, because I think it's understandable sometimes, I think, for a loved one, when you see your child's, or sibling or anyone struggling, sometimes you will go in like very anxious, a bit angry, you'll want to fix it, you'll want to kind of almost sort of shake them, because you really want them to be well and you don't want them to be struggling. But yep. If you approach it with too much kind of force, I guess the person will probably just shut down and withdraw, and it won't really talk to you about it. So I just say it's normal that people will be ambivalent about talking about it. So just to almost expect that, it would be quite unusual in a way, I think, if you approach someone and they said, yeah, I've been struggling, and we're very open, but I guess every case is different. Just good to test the water and be there when the person is open to talking.
Yeah, and for someone who is dealing with this eating disorder, should they be more open about it, or keep it behind closed doors?
Yeah, I think definitely be more open. I mean, I think what's really important is, as and when people feel ready, is to just tell somebody, and that might be, perhaps a good friend, or it might be a parent, might be a sibling. But I think it's perhaps trying to choose someone who you can trust, who is good at listening, who is unlikely to get really anxious and want to kind of fix it. Try to choose someone in your life who is really kind of just good at holding space for you. And I think for many people, saying it out loud is incredibly powerful, because it's often something that people have been denying that they're struggling with. There's been so much secrecy and shame. So actually, when they do say things out loud, that can just be such a powerful step forward. And just for, you don't need anyone else to fix it or to step in, but just knowing, someone else knowing, can be incredibly helpful. And I guess then, as and when you're ready, they could support you on your journey to getting help when you feel ready to do that.
And how bad is social media when it comes to causing eating disorders?
I think social media definitely doesn't help, does it? It's like throwing fuel on an already burning fire. I mean, I think you can't say social media causes eating disorders, because eating disorders have been around for a long time, and that they are sort of deeper than that, the issues are often kind of more deep rooted. But I think social media absolutely makes things worse because of 24/7 you've got people that you can compare yourself with, you've got people promoting diets, you've got people that are probably struggling with food but are showing the kind of bright shiny image to everybody. And so it doesn't help. I mean, also, I suppose it is helpful to notice on the other side of things, there's some helpful stuff on social media, like a lot of stuff on intuitive eating, body neutrality, body positivity. So I think if you follow the right accounts, actually, you can find a lot of community and support and help on social media as well. But it's, I think it's very important for individuals really to think about what's helpful for them.
And are there any ways to get around this toxic social media things that we're dealing with that almost don't help eating disorders?
Yeah, well, I think, I guess it's all the standard things that are said, isn't it, in terms of like, detox your social media feed and like, think about being intentional when you're on social media in terms of how much time you spend. I mean, I think all those things are helpful. I mean, what I would say as well is helpful is to, I think in this day and age, we've become so fixated on food, on body image, and we can spend so much time looking at those kind of accounts. And I think sometimes as well, just for people to be looking at, say, like travel or something else that they're interested in, like their hobbies and interests, just expanding your interests and your self-worth beyond your food, your exercise, your body, that can be incredibly helpful because it just can balance things out. Because I think even with the best will in the world, even if you're looking at intuitive eating, body neutrality, etc., it's still a lot of focus on the body, a lot of focus on what you're eating. And it's really good to, isn't it, to like derive our self-worth from a whole range of things and to, reduce that segment of the pie chart of self-worth, I think.
Yeah. And are there any myths you've come across when it comes to eating disorders and bulimia?
So I think some people might just say, oh, it's all about vanity and how you look. I guess, it's not true. Most people with eating disorders have very high levels of body dissatisfaction. They're not kind of walking around thinking, oh, wow, I look really great by any means. So, and it's much more deep rooted. Most people that you'll talk to that have an eating disorder, when you really start to explore things with them, there'll be things that have happened to them in their past that have really impacted them and impacted their self-worth and how they deal with their emotions. So I think that's a kind of key one.
And can you share a success story from your work where a young person has been able to overcome an eating disorder and went on to lead a fulfilling and successful life?
Yeah, a good question. I mean, I've worked with so many people over the years. I mean, I think one that just jumped straight into my mind, actually, somebody who had lived with an eating disorder from about the age of 12 to 22, had it for 10 years. So it'd been really, really so detrimental, been in and out of hospital numerous times. And it was really kind of at that point where they were quite resigned and services were quite resigned to the fact that this person was probably going to be living with eating disorders through their adult life. And they were almost going to be sort of seen as this kind of chronic patient. And pre to the, so earlier in the earlier stages of the eating disorder, this had been someone as well who had, I think, applied to go on like the junior apprentice and like had so many like exciting opportunities ahead, but the eating disorder had completely like derailed all of this. But I had the privilege, I guess, of working with this person as they were coming out of hospital from one of the, what became their final admission. And they just took a different turn in the road, I guess. There's something that just really, a switch that was flicked almost in terms of their perspective and just really understanding, I guess just what their future could hold and tapping into their purpose and really recognizing how the way the eating disorder had been sort of helping them cope was very dysfunctional, and they were prepared to let that go. So that was incredibly rewarding, because I think as well, sometimes when someone's been almost a bit written off, which is really sad, because you should always be hopeful and never write people off. But yeah, to see someone like make a full recovery and to fully weight restore and to go on and do amazing things.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, congratulations for doing this sort of thing. I mean, it must be extremely rewarding trying to help people overcome these major issues that society is dealing with. I'm going to lean more towards the school system. And the reason the school system is so crucial, in my opinion, in dealing with this sort of issues, because as children and teenagers, it's before we enter the open world with all these different society norms and everything, it's important to understand what schools can do to try and prevent these sort of things as people grow up as a whole. What would you change in the school system to try develop an understanding of eating disorders and help people who are dealing with the problem?
Sure, and a great question. But I think I'd say even like, although schools are important, I'd say what's even more important before schools is kind of parents and the society at large. You know, because I think we do live in what's often termed kind of diet culture, where people don't understand sort of the psychological impact of someone's relationship with food and body image. You know, we're told a lot about, even on all the leading podcasts and things today, you know, we're told about intermittent fasting and like all these special diets and all the different things that you have to do. And what people don't understand is that actually someone's relationship with food, the psychological aspect is so key. And, you know, parents can do so much, you know, like if parents start to understand actually me talking about diets all the time and me looking in the mirror and saying how much I hate my body and me going off to Slimming World and me talking about overweight people in a really negative way, you know, when parents, and I'm not sort of like, I'm trying to, you know, be hard on parents here. I'm a parent myself. I'm talking about the culture generally, really. But I guess, you know, parents have a big role in that to be able to have an influence. So I think that's really it's so important even before people go into school, because of, you know, that's so much of like the early messages are really, really important. Then I think generally, once we get into school as well, you know, I think there's been so much change and there's so much more focus on mental well-being, dealing with emotions, you know, sort of finding your voice, thinking, body image. There's a lot of good work being doing, but I think it just needs to be ramped up to another level where mental health is really prioritized almost as much as academic work, because I think there's so much pressure in schools to be perfect, to be really driven, to be really hardworking, to meet these external conditions. And for a lot of young people, that's just so much pressure. And then I think the parents feel pressurized as well to like be pushing their children down this path. And for some people as well, it's just too much. And then things like eating disorders, struggles with mental health become a kind of coping strategy to deal with all of that. So I think we should still really like push people to achieve and be their best self and, you know, find the things they love and, you know, excel in life, but as well, like not having to be perfect, not having to be not to be so externally validated, and for it to be so conditional, and for mental health to be so much more integrated as part of the kind of package of, you know, someone's development.
And is there a level of importance in educating individuals, even those who may not be dealing with the eating disorder, on the topic? And why so?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a balance as well sometimes of not sometimes putting ideas into people's heads. Do you know what I mean? Like talking so much specifically about eating disorders. I think what's more important is more the kind of the root things that are underneath an eating disorder. So helping someone feel resilient, helping someone feel that they have a good support network, that people they can talk to, help someone feel that they can deal with their emotions in a healthy way, that it's okay to talk about their emotions, you know, working on body image, you know, having much more of a body neutral approach rather than, you know, valuing one's worth so much on the body, working on issues like self-worth. So I'd say more those kind of deeper issues are important, and perhaps rather than going in and really specifically talking about eating disorders in detail.
Yeah, and are there any specific tips or advice you would give to those who are dealing with eating disorders?
Yes. So, I mean, I guess I would say, like, you know, try to pursue help, because I mean, I know for myself, there wasn't much help back in the day. And I had an eating disorder for, you know, just over 7 years. And I really believe that if I'd had professional help, that would have been, the duration of the eating disorder would have been massively reduced. So I think, you know, getting professional help can be really, really helpful. I think, again, I say to people as well, like, educate yourself. The great thing is now there's a lot of great information online through kind of podcasts, through YouTube and things like that. So you can, if you're struggling and you don't feel ready to talk to a professional yet, you can really start to kind of educate yourself. You can like read books as well, like memoirs of people that have recovered. You can start to really absorb yourself in that whole world if you're feeling ready for recovery. And it also says, well, like, talk to people in your that you trust, that you can be open with. I know in my own recovery, just having really good friends that I could talk to was invaluable. Being able to kind of be vulnerable, being able to talk about your feelings. I think that's a massive help, just for anything you're going through in life. So it's a couple of starting points, I guess.
Yep. So there's a constant question I've asked all my guests since the day one I've been doing this podcast, and we're coming to an end now of the interview. What is your personal definition of success?
Ooh, I would say it is about being, fully your authentic self. And I guess what I mean by that, because I think everyone talks about this nowadays, don't they? But I think it's being, truly in line with your values, knowing what's important to you, knowing what your strengths are, and then really living your life in that aligned way. So I think when you really pursue the things that you love and that you're passionate about, it just brings so much joy, and that's the thing about being authentic. Because I think when you're externally validated and you're doing what you feel you should do, what the world deems as success, often you can like wake up one day and think, oh, I'm doing the job, I've got the money, I've got the partner or whatever, but I don't feel happy. Whereas actually when you come back to yourself and you're truly in line with your own kind of values and what brings you joy, I think that is the path to real success.
Yeah, and then to end us off, if you could go back and say one thing to your 16-year-old self, what would that be?
Yeah, I just say trust yourself, trust your voice. I had a very strong knowing from very young, I think, what was right for me, but I didn't trust that voice. I was always looking to people around me, and that really sent me a bit off track, off kilter. And I really knew from very young what was more the right path for me. So I say, trust your voice. And I think to do that, you have to slow down, give yourself time to be with your thoughts, get to know yourself. And that can be scary for some people, but it's worth it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate this conversation. So thank you.
Thanks very much.